It's the all-new GovTech360, the collision of government, technology, and the future.
This time out, state CIOs by the numbers. As their national association prepares to mark 50 years of tech bosses being a thing, caution flags from Teri Takai on missing voices caused by a growing gender gap, and Dustin Haisler on short tenures as market disruptors.
A GovTech360 cover story.
From the Market Insight Studios, I'm Paul Taylor with Ben Miller, GovTech's data editor. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Paul. Thanks for having me.
You bet. You've got the cover story this week, and it's looking at CIOs, state CIOs, by the numbers.
Thing 1.
They used to joke amongst themselves that CIO stood for career is over. What does the data say?
Yes and no. In terms of being in public sector IT anyway, one of the things that we looked at was the quote-unquote survival rates of state CIOs, which was my own cheeky way of terming basically when a CIO is retained under a new governor. And what we found is that CIOs survive a governor change about 34% of the time overall. This is going back to 1994, looking at about a little over 200 terms that CIOs served at the state level. So it's 30% survivability rate when a new governor comes in from a different party. It's a little bit higher, 39% when the governor's seat does not change parties. So if you have a governor's seat going from a Republican to a Republican, they're a little bit more likely to keep the old CIO, but not that much. Still, the majority of the time, if you're a state CIO and there's a new governor coming in, it likely means that you're getting replaced.
Thing 2.
State CIOs that come from a governor's campaign, a trendy startup, or a big beltway integrator get the headlines. But Ben, your data say that the ranks of the CIO remain in large part a product of their raising.
What we found is that the majority of CIOs at the state level actually come from the public sector. 59% of them, in fact. A lot of these are chief information security officers, every once in a while a chief data officer or something like that. They'll be deputy CIOs. Sometimes they'll be CIOs at an agency level for, say, a disaster relief agency or something like that. Sometimes they'll be simply a career administrator, somebody who's good at leading departments who gets chosen.
Thing 3.
So that's about 3/4 public, 1/4 private in terms of the state CIO pipeline, with something of a mirror image on the way out.
After they are CIOs, they tend to go to the private sector. About 52% go to the private sector after serving. 8% are kind of scattered between education, nonprofits, and the military. But yeah, the data certainly suggests that the majority of the time, the state CIO job is sort of a path between the public sector and the private.
Thing 4.
By your numbers, what is the average tenure of the state CIO, and how does that compare to NASCIO's numbers?
It looks like NASCIO pegs the average tenure of a state CIO at around 20 months, so closing in on 2 years, but not quite there. We found it actually being a little bit longer, 3 years and 6 months, so 3.5 years, which is, of course, just a little bit under the average term, or at least constitutional term, of state governors. Most of them serve for 4 years at a time.
Thing 5.
Because it's 2019, governors rightfully and increasingly point with pride to the gender diversity and inclusivity on their cabinet, but not so much where their state CIO is concerned. The high water mark for women CIOs in state government was over a decade ago, at about 20%. And now that proportion of women has slipped to single digits.
And what we found was that if you look at it all together, the overall percentage of state CIOs who have been women is about 17%. I do want to point out that this doesn't appear to be all that far off from the private sector in terms of overall numbers, according to a survey or two that I've seen of private sector CIOs. But yeah, it's an interesting trend to see the numbers go down over time when generally the workforce in general has tried to, or at least has talked about moving toward gender parity. So, if you have 50 state CIOs, then gender parity would be 25 men, 25 women, speaking, using a binary, of course.
We did have the chance to talk to Teri Takai as you were finishing up your research. She now serves as executive director of our sister organization, the Center for Digital Government. But importantly, she was a trailblazing state CIO in both Michigan and California. What did she have to say about what we, the collective we, are missing when women are underrepresented among the ranks and their voices are missing from the conversation?
Teri Takai talked a lot about the importance of diversity in general and the importance of having diverse points of view based on a person's life experiences and their backgrounds, talking about things like a person's empathy skills, their collaboration skills, their ability to bring people together and come to a compromise, which is something that's very, very important for the modern CIO.
I think there's also an empathy piece in there, Paul. Interesting as that sounds. We talk a lot about this point around emotional intelligence, but emotional intelligence in many ways, a large component of that is empathy, the ability to listen, and the ability to, through that listening, be able to bring in your ideas, but do it in a collaborative way. And I just think that women have many more experiences where they utilize that skill. And so therefore sometimes, have developed it more fully.
Thing 6.
When everything goes wrong and you can't remember the name of your CIO, what names, when yelled, are most likely to have someone come running?
That would be Jim. According to the data that we collected, there have been 14 CIOs named Jim or James. If you're shouting into a crowd of people, I think there's a good chance somebody named James responds to Jim, or at least kind of looks around. Who's calling me by the name my parents call me, or something like that. That was the most common name. Among the others, we also had Dave and David were at 10, John and Jack were at 8. William and Bill also at 8, Michael and Mike at 7, and Richard and Rich also at 7.
An extra thing.
To help us get a full 360-degree view of this, our co-host and Chief Innovation Officer, Dustin Haisler, has been listening in. Dustin, what does this relatively brief tenure of state CIOs mean for GovTech startups that do business with state government or want to?
It means that you can't put all of your eggs in one basket or one contact. It's more important than ever for GovTech startups and GovTech companies in general to go deep within agencies and really to build relationships with the multiple points of influence within the buying process. Your champion may be a CIO, and they may have led and been a real advocate for your solution. But as this piece indicates, with shorter lengths of tenure, this requires that you get to know the rest of their staff and people that may outlive them within the organization. So I think the key learning here for these companies is you have to go from the top to the bottom and be relevant and be present with not just the key decision maker, but with their team for having any type of long-term survivability.
And all of that without violating the cardinal rule of dancing with the one that brung you.
Exactly.
Before we go, back to Ben for just a minute on GT's emerging data practice. We heard a sample today, and the story's hiding in plain sight. Ben, what's coming up? What is in your pipeline?
I'm really curious to just kind of develop a better understanding of who makes up state and local government IT. So here we're examining CIOs at the state level. We can also examine CIOs at the county level and at the city level. We can also look at chief data officers, chief information security officers, chief privacy officers, all of these people who have come to take on these really important various areas of government technology. And we actually have in our next issue, I believe, a piece coming out on chief privacy officers at the state level. Spoiler alert, there are far fewer chief privacy officers than there are chief information officers, but we collected some interesting information on them, and we'll be publishing the numbers on that coming before too long.
We look forward to all of that. And in the meantime, connect with us on Twitter. Ben is at Ben Arnold Miller. Dustin is at Dustin Haisler, where you can also follow him this month during his tech and policy journey through China as an Eisenhower Fellow. I'm at PW Taylor, and the entire editorial brain trust is at GovTech News. Summer is here, and no road trip would be complete without a little Tom Petty and your new favorite podcast. Subscribe for free to GovTech360 on Apple or Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or the new radio.com app. And it's always available at home, govtech.com/360. For all of us at Government Technology, thanks for listening and have a great summer.
GovTech360 is produced by Government Technology, a division of eRepublic.